Have you ever noticed how exhausting it becomes to constantly check if others approve of your choices? How draining it feels to filter every decision through the question, what will they think? Today, I want to show you something that Henry David Thoreau discovered during his 2 years alone at Walden Pond. Something so terrifying and liberating that most people spend their entire lives running from it. The terrifying freedom of not needing validation from anyone. Not your family, not your friends, not society, not even the invisible audience in your head that whispers judgments about everything you do. Thoreau called this self-reliance taken to its logical conclusion, and he warned that once you truly taste this freedom, you can never go back to living for others' approval. But here's what makes this discovery so unsettling. The moment you stop seeking external validation, you realize how much of your life has been performance. How many decisions you've made not because they felt right to your soul, but because they looked right to others. How many dreams you've abandoned, relationships you've stayed in, careers you've chosen, all in service of an audience that, Thoreau realized, was largely imaginary. Thoreau wrote in his journal, "The only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence becomes an act of rebellion." But this isn't the comfortable freedom we talk about in motivational quotes. This is the kind of freedom that makes people uncomfortable around you, the kind that makes family members worried, friends distant, colleagues confused. Because when someone stops performing for approval, they become unpredictable, authentic. And authenticity, Thoreau discovered, is deeply threatening to a world built on pretense. During his experiment at Walden Pond, Thoreau made a radical observation. He noticed that the less he cared about others' opinions, the more clearly he could hear his own inner voice. But this clarity came with a price. He had to face the terrifying question that most people spend their lives avoiding. Who am I when nobody is watching? What do I actually want when I remove the need to impress, please, or conform? The answer, he found, was both liberating and isolating. Because when you discover your authentic self, you realize how rare genuine connection actually is. Most of what we call relationships are really just mutual performance agreements. I'll validate your choices if you validate mine. But what happens when one person takes off the mask entirely? Thoreau described this phenomenon with brutal honesty. I went to the woods to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. Notice the word deliberately, not automatically, not reactively, not in response to others' expectations, but deliberately, according to his own compass. And this is where most people feel the terror creeping in, because living deliberately means taking full responsibility for your choices. It means you can't blame your parents, your circumstances, society, or bad luck when things don't work out. It means recognizing that most of your dissatisfaction comes not from external conditions, but from living according to external definitions of success, happiness, and worth. The first thing Thoreau realized about validation independence was that most people are terrified of solitude, because that's where the performance stops working. You can't impress yourself with a fake smile. You can't convince yourself you're happy with achievements that feel empty. In solitude, Thoreau wrote, all the noise falls away, and what remains is either authentic contentment or the echo of your soul's dissatisfaction. This is why so many people fill every moment with distraction, with other people's voices, with constant stimulation. Because in the quiet, they might hear the whisper they've been avoiding. This isn't the life you actually want. These aren't the dreams you actually dream. This isn't who you actually are. But Thoreau discovered something remarkable about this terror. He wrote, The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. The very solitude that feels threatening is actually where you discover your most authentic desires, where you learn to trust your own judgment, where you develop what he called an economy of the soul that doesn't depend on external deposits of approval. Most people, Thoreau observed, live lives of quiet desperation precisely because they've outsourced their sense of worth to others. They've become emotional beggars, constantly seeking approval, validation, permission to exist as they are. They check their phones obsessively, not for information, but for confirmation that they matter, that someone sees them, that their choices are acceptable. And I want to pause here for a moment because I know some of you are feeling something right now. That familiar ache of recognition. Maybe you've been carrying this exhaustion for so long that you thought it was normal. Maybe you've been performing for others' approval for so many years that you've forgotten what your authentic voice even sounds like. I see you. I understand that weight you're carrying, the constant mental calculation of, will they approve? Will they judge? Am I enough? If this is hitting close to home, if you're tired of living your life through other people's eyes, I want you to do something brave right now. Write in the comments, I'm ready to stop performing. Just those 4 words. Because when you write it, you're not just helping yourself, you're helping someone else who's been suffering in silence realize they're not alone. You're giving permission to others to be honest about this struggle too. So go ahead, write it down. I'm ready to stop performing. Your courage might be exactly what someone else needs to see today. But what if you didn't need that confirmation? What if your sense of worth came from alignment with your deepest values, rather than applause from the crowd? What if you trusted your own perceptions so completely that others' opinions became interesting information rather than emotional commands? This is what Thoreau meant by terrifying freedom. It's terrifying because it means you have no one to blame and no one to hide behind. But it's freedom because it means you have no one to perform for and nothing to prove. The second discovery Thoreau made was that people react strangely when you stop seeking their validation. Some become confused, wondering why their approval doesn't seem to affect you. Others become frustrated, as if your independence somehow invalidates their dependence. Some become curious, drawn to the calm confidence of someone who doesn't need their permission to exist. Thoreau wrote about this phenomenon with characteristic insight. The mass of men served the state thus, not as men mainly, but as machines with their bodies. In most cases, there is no free exercise whatever of the judgment or of the moral sense. He wasn't being cruel. He was observing that most people operate automatically, following social scripts rather than conscious choice. When you step out of this automatic behavior, when you start making decisions based on internal rather than external criteria, you become what Thoreau called a majority of one. You discover that popular opinion is often popular precisely because it requires no deep thinking, no uncomfortable self-examination, no risk of standing alone. But standing alone, Thoreau realized, is where real strength develops. Not the strength to dominate others, but the strength to remain yourself regardless of social pressure. Not the strength to impose your will, but the strength to follow your authentic path even when it leads away from the crowd. The third insight Thoreau gained was that once you stop needing others' approval, you also stop needing their disapproval to define your identity. Many people think they're independent because they rebel against social expectations. But rebellion is still a reaction. True independence, Thoreau found, means making choices from your own center, regardless of whether they align with or oppose popular opinion. He wrote, "If a man does not keep pace with his companions, perhaps it is because he hears a different drummer. Let him step to the music which he hears, however measured or far away." This isn't about being different for the sake of being different. It's about being authentic, even when authenticity doesn't match external expectations. The practical implications of this shift are profound. When you stop seeking validation, you start making decisions based on different criteria. Instead of asking, "What will they think?" you start asking, "What feels true to who I am?" Instead of choosing based on what looks impressive, you choose based on what creates genuine satisfaction. Your relationships change. Surface connections naturally fade because you're no longer willing to maintain them through performance. But the relationships that remain deepen dramatically because they're based on genuine compatibility rather than mutual ego stroking. Your career evolves. You stop climbing ladders that lead to places you don't actually want to go. You start defining success in terms of fulfillment and contribution rather than status and recognition. Your daily experience transforms. Without the constant mental energy spent calculating how to present yourself, you have more capacity for genuine presence, creativity, and joy. The fourth thing Thoreau discovered was that validation independence doesn't mean isolation or indifference to others. Instead, it creates the foundation for genuine connection. When you don't need others to complete you or confirm you, you can relate to them without hidden agendas. You can offer authentic appreciation rather than strategic flattery. Thoreau wrote, "I love to be alone. I never found the companion that was so companionable as solitude." This wasn't misanthropy. It was the recognition that until you can be genuinely comfortable with yourself, you can't offer genuine companionship to others. You'll always be subtly trying to get something from them, using relationship as a way to avoid the fundamental task of self-knowledge and self-acceptance. But when you've done that work, when you've learned to validate yourself from within, your relationships become gifts rather than necessities. You choose connection from abundance rather than need. The fifth insight Thoreau gained was perhaps the most unsettling. He realized that most of what we call success in society is actually just sophisticated forms of approval seeking. The corner office, the social media following, the prestigious degree, the perfect family photo, even the spiritual achievements, they can all become ways of earning validation rather than expressions of authentic preference. Thoreau wrote, "A man is rich in proportion to the number of things which he can afford to let alone." This includes being able to let alone the need to prove your worth through achievement, to demonstrate your value through acquisition, to establish your identity through association with impressive people or institutions. This doesn't mean becoming lazy or unambitious. It means distinguishing between activities that genuinely fulfill you and activities that you pursue primarily for external recognition. When your motivation shifts from "how will this look" to "how will this feel to live," your entire relationship with effort and achievement transforms. The sixth thing Thoreau learned was that validation independence requires developing what he called a different relationship with time. Most people live in chronic anxiety about the future or regret about the past because they're constantly measuring their progress against external standards. Am I ahead or behind compared to my peers? Am I achieving fast enough to impress others? But when you stop using others as measuring sticks, you can engage with your actual present moment. You can make decisions based on what feels right now rather than what might look good later. Thoreau wrote, "Time is but the stream I go a-fishing in. I drink at it, but while I drink I see the sandy bottom and detect how shallow it is." No, he was describing the profound shift that happens when you stop racing against imaginary deadlines and start moving at the pace of authentic development. The seventh insight Thoreau gained was that validation independence reveals the difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is the painful awareness that you're disconnected from others. But this disconnection often happens even when you're surrounded by people, especially when those connections are based on performance rather than authenticity. Solitude, however, is the comfortable awareness that you're connected to yourself. It's the ability to enjoy your own company, to find your own thoughts interesting, to feel complete without external stimulation or confirmation. This is perhaps the most terrifying aspect of validation independence for many people. The recognition that much of what they call social life is actually sophisticated avoidance of solitude. The constant texting, the need to always have plans, the anxiety when alone with their thoughts. These aren't signs of being social. They're signs of being uncomfortable with themselves. But when you develop the capacity to be genuinely alone without feeling lonely, something magical happens. You become much more selective about the company you keep. You stop filling time with people who drain your energy just to avoid being by yourself. The eighth thing Thoreau discovered was that validation independence transforms your relationship with material possessions. When you stop trying to impress others or keep up with social expectations, you can make decisions about money and belongings based on actual utility rather than symbolic value. When you're not performing for others, you can distinguish between things you actually want and things you think you should want. You can buy what brings you genuine pleasure rather than what signals your status. You can live in a space that feels like home rather than a showroom. This shift often leads to what Thoreau called voluntary simplicity. But it's not simplicity as deprivation. It's simplicity as clarity. When you remove the noise of social comparison, you can hear your actual preferences more clearly. The ninth insight Thoreau gained was that validation independence requires developing what he called civil disobedience on an emotional level. Just as he was willing to go to jail rather than pay taxes that supported slavery, he learned to be willing to disappoint others rather than betray his own principles. This doesn't mean being rebellious for its own sake. It means being willing to withstand social pressure when your authentic choice conflicts with social expectation. It means developing the emotional strength to stand alone when necessary, even when standing alone feels uncomfortable. Thoreau wrote, "Under a government which imprisons any unjustly, the true place for a just man is also a prison. Sometimes the price of maintaining your integrity is accepting disapproval, criticism, or rejection from others. This requires developing what might be called emotional courage, the willingness to feel disappointed, frustrated, or isolated, rather than compromise your authentic self to gain acceptance." The 10th and perhaps most profound thing Thoreau discovered about validation independence was that it reveals the difference between confidence and arrogance. Many people assume that not needing others' approval means thinking you're better than others. But Thoreau found the opposite to be true. When you stop deriving your worth from being superior to others, you also stop feeling threatened by their success, intelligence, or achievements. You can appreciate others' gifts without feeling diminished by them. You can acknowledge your own strengths without needing to prove them constantly. Thoreau wrote, "The only way to speak the truth is to speak lovingly." When you're not defending your ego or managing others' perceptions, you can be more genuinely kind, more honestly helpful, more authentically generous. Arrogance comes from insecurity disguised as superiority. But genuine confidence comes from what Thoreau called self-trust, the quiet knowing that you're enough as you are, that your worth doesn't depend on being better than anyone else. This self-trust is developed through the practice of listening to your inner voice and honoring it even when it's inconvenient. Every time you choose authenticity over approval, you build evidence that you can trust yourself to make good decisions. And here's where Thoreau's insight becomes truly revolutionary. He realized that this kind of emotional independence isn't selfish. It's actually the foundation of genuine service to others. When you're not constantly managing your own insecurities and need for validation, you have much more energy available for authentic contribution. You can help others without needing them to be grateful. You can offer truth without needing them to agree. You can be present with their struggles without needing to fix them to feel valuable. Thoreau wrote, "The only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence becomes an act of rebellion. But this rebellion isn't against others. It's against the unconscious patterns that keep most people trapped in cycles of seeking external validation. When you break free from these patterns, you don't become isolated from humanity. You become more deeply connected to what's most human in yourself and others. You can see through the performances to the authentic person underneath. This is the ultimate paradox of validation independence. The less you need others' approval, the more genuinely you can love them. The less you're performing for their benefit, the more you can actually benefit them. The more comfortable you become with solitude, the better company you become for others. But it all begins with the terrifying recognition that no one else can give you the validation you're seeking, that the approval you crave from others must first be generated from within, that the permission you're waiting for to live your authentic life will never come from external sources. Thoreau spent those 2 years at Walden Pond proving to himself that he could be completely content without social validation. Not because he didn't value human connection, but because he wanted his connections to be chosen from freedom rather than fear. The result was what he called the Great Awakening. The recognition that most human suffering comes not from external circumstances, but from the internal prison of caring more about others' opinions than your own authentic experience. And once you claim this freedom, once you discover that you can be completely content with your own approval, everything changes. Your relationships become more genuine because they're not based on hidden needs. Your work becomes more fulfilling because it expresses your values rather than your insecurities. Your daily experience becomes richer because you're present with what is, rather than anxious about how it appears. This is what Thoreau meant when he wrote, "I learned this, at least, by my experiment, that if one advances confidently in the direction of his dreams and endeavors to live the life which he has imagined, he will meet with a success unexpected in common hours." The success he was talking about wasn't external achievement. It was the deep satisfaction that comes from living in alignment with your authentic self, the peace that comes from making decisions based on your own values rather than others' expectations, the freedom that comes from being more interested in your own respect than others' approval. So the question becomes, are you ready for this terrifying freedom? Are you willing to discover who you are when you stop performing for others' approval? Are you brave enough to trust your own judgment, even when it leads you away from popular opinion? Because once you taste the freedom of not needing validation, there's no going back. Once you discover how peaceful it feels to live from your authentic center, you can never again be satisfied with performing for applause. Once you learn to generate your own sense of worth, you'll never again be willing to beg for it from others. This is both the terror and the gift of Thoreau's discovery. The terror of taking full responsibility for your choices, your happiness, your life direction, but also the gift of finally truly being free. If what you've heard today resonates with something deep inside you, if you feel that familiar stirring of recognition and hope, then this journey of authentic living might be exactly what you need right now. I share these insights because I know how lonely it can feel when you start questioning everything you've been taught about success, relationships, and what it means to live a meaningful life. If you're ready to explore more of these ideas, to dive deeper into what it means to live deliberately, hit subscribe. Your authentic self is worth fighting for, and this journey is worth taking.